1. About 2.5 years ago, my apartment was broken into during a camping trip. Some things were stolen, including multiple firearms. A year and a half ago, one of my firearms was found with some kids selling crack in a small city, right over the border of the next state. The plea deals fell through, and the girl the cops had initially mentioned was going to trial. I receive a letter in the mail telling me of the court date and location, but it is explicitly not a summons. Whatever. I want my gun back sooner than later, so I go. Both the prosecutor and the assistant prosecutor are out sick, one with COVID. They make us hang around for a while for no reason, and eventually I just leave. They didn't like that, but whatever. Being there was legally voluntary. I tell them they can mail me the new date, and I'll deal with it then. 3 weeks go by, and here we are this morning. I get home from work and I check my mail. There are 2 letters. One for the first girl, and another is for a guy I know just as an accomplice from the updates about the girl. His trial is today, and hers is tomorrow. I go to the courthouse, 40 minutes away, and let them know I'm here. Everything is fine. They bring in the jury pool and spend 2 hours getting down to 7 jurors. The trial starts, and we're just patiently waiting. 4 cops and 1 other civilian victim and witness. They tell us no worries, this will be super quick. They basically just need to ask them if it's a firearm I reported stolen, and I'll be on my way. They call in all the cops, who are getting paid this whole time, first. It's now 1 p.m. I've been up for 24 hours on 3 hours of sleep the day before, after working a 12-hour-plus overnight shift. My entire body is cramping. I'm super uncomfortable. I'm exhausted. I last ate at 10 p.m. The assistant district attorney comes out and tells us they're taking an hour lunch break. I tell her I can't stay and I need to leave. She tells me I'm not allowed to. I already presented as a witness to the judge. I'd been summoned. I hadn't. They can charge me with this or that. One of the cops tells me they could detain me. The judge could order me after I point out that I haven't been summoned, and again, this is voluntary. Basically, they try and strong-arm me when all I want to do is go home. I point out that this guy isn't even who I was told was found with my gun. The assistant DA starts explaining how, oh no, he really was. I don't know who you heard that from. My local PD mentioned the girl by name originally, giving me all these details about the case, then re-emphasizing I really must stay, or I'll be charged with a crime. Don't worry though, we'll get you in right away so you can leave soon. Soon being in more than an hour, minimum. Here's the thing, the judge issued a sequester order first thing in the morning before jury selection. I say fine and wait. Here comes the single greatest act of malicious compliance I've ever committed in my life. All the attorneys come in, all the jury comes in. The judge makes me swear to tell the truth. I do. As soon as I finish, I blurt out the prosecutor broke the sequester and was telling me about the case during the break. Stop. Everyone except the lawyers out, including me. Eventually, they just bring me back in. The judge again makes me swear to tell the truth, confirms I understand what's happening, tells me the importance of a fair trial. Maybe you don't witness tamper then? And explains that witnesses are never to volunteer information, and are to only answer the questions. You have been summoned, and it's a legal obligation. I let him finish, and mention that I have never been summoned. He says, then I'm ordering you, understood? Yes. Everyone comes back in. We all take our oaths again. The prosecutor that was threatening me starts asking questions. Here's the thing, I swore to tell the truth. I never agreed to tell it in a way that makes her life easier. She asks me some basic questions, name, age, what I do for work, etc. Then she gets into the actual questions. Do I own weapons? Did I report any stolen around this date? Did I own one of this model? Did I report this model stolen, etc.? Is this your gun? Certainly looks like it. Did the police contact you when it was recovered? No. Who did? Oh, it was a different police department. My local PD. Did they give you any details regarding how it was recovered? They said it was allegedly used in a crime by, and I gave the girl's name. The defense objects, and the judge strikes that from the testimony. By now the DA is realizing that she's giving me too much leeway and starts asking for yes or no answers. Eventually asks if I'd recognize the serial number if I saw it. I tell her no, and that roughly sums up my questions from her. Then it's the defendant's turn, and it goes exactly as you would expect by now. I answer truthfully, but in favorable wording. You said it looks like your gun, but you can't confirm. I'd need to compare the serial number against a police report or the gun shop, which still has it on record. Do you know who stole your firearm? No. Do you recognize my client? No. She asked a few more plausible deniability questions, and then I was free to go. I can't wait to be back tomorrow for the girls' trial. I'll probably be much less malicious, but I know the DA will be nervous when she sees me. Court is officially over, so the sequester order is no longer in effect. Good times, and don't worry. If I botched her case in this regard, that kid had more than enough charges. He should have taken the plea deal. 2. I used to work in a microbiology lab in a hospital. We had a big staff, lots of people coming and going, and the managerial staff were honestly not very good. Most of them had been promoted due to seniority of lab experience and qualifications, and very few had any management training whatsoever. A big issue I had with management was that they'd arrange collections for coworkers secretively. Usually they'd only remember to do it for managerial staff, but there was an expectation for staff on every level to chip in, so I took it upon myself to organize the forgotten collections, leaving present significant birthdays and collections for new parents for members of staff at every level, not just the ones who were chummy with the heads of department. This colleague, Linda, was an older woman with a lifetime experience working for a well-known travel agency that had recently shut most of its branches worldwide. Linda resented being trained by younger staff, even though she had no clue about anything remotely scientific. She was lazy and would refuse to do tasks she found boring, even if they were essential for lab maintenance. But worst of all, she was a bully. She particularly enjoyed picking on an autistic colleague and anyone who seemed vulnerable. This culminated in her trying to make Sarah jump as a prank after she learned Sarah was particularly jumpy and prone to panic attacks when triggered. We never disclosed this, but it was due to her past in an abusive relationship. Linda thought that people who were triggered were snowflakes and woke. On a particularly busy day, Linda jumped suddenly at Sarah, who responded in a fight-or-flight mode and punched Linda in the face, breaking her glasses and busting her nose. Naturally, Linda couldn't handle the humiliation and dirty looks she received after that. Everyone was unanimously supportive of Sarah. She handed in her notice and found a job as a carer. I'd spent a lot of time training her and decided to do a collection for her as I did for everyone. And I did feel kind of bad for her, even though she was dreadful. While I had been training her, she told me a lot of her personal gripes. She didn't like chocolates with raisins or nuts in. She didn't like books as gifts, homework. She didn't like when people bought her bathing products, intimate, inappropriate, presumptive, and insulting. And she thought candles were for hippies. To be frank, I think she was making a joke about some of these, but she was also very rude about hippies around a Jamaican colleague who wore dreadlocks. I got a lackluster collection for her, and we got her a leaving card signed by everyone in the department, including Sarah. Some fancy chocolate-covered fruit, a gorgeous copy of Wuthering Heights, my least favorite book at school, re-gifted bath bombs, and incense sticks with a wooden holder tray. Honestly, she was beaming when she was given them, and she seemed genuinely touched. I hope she's happy now, and who knows, maybe she's an excellent care worker. I'm not sure if this counts as PettyRevenge, but I still feel wicked when I think about it. 3. My roommate's partner is the absolute worst, and I've been struggling dealing with them for 2 years now. They're almost never at their own home, and instead just stay at ours for months at a time. The worst parts are that they never clean up after themselves and act like the flat is theirs constantly. The first birthday I lived there, they snuck into my room and then tried to kick me out without my roommate's permission, 'cause they didn't like what they found there. The other day they were shouting at their roommate about me walking around the flat in a very skimpy bra. I'd literally run into the kitchen to grab a clean shirt from the drying rack. After spending every day for the last few months picking up and cleaning their dirty dishes, literally, having to pull wrappers out of half-eaten food, and throwing away trash they've just dropped on the floor or counters and left, I talked to my roommate and said if her partner is going to stay here this long, then they have to contribute to cleaning up the flat, or at least clean up after themselves. Then I went out for the day. I came back home to the partner sitting in a mostly clean kitchen with the dishwasher running and baking a cake, a win for me. Normally when they did something like this there'd be dishes and trash everywhere. Also, the partner is blanking me and not saying a word when I'm around. Another win. A couple of hours later, a roommate comes into my room asking if I want a cake so sweet it makes you sick. I try a bit, and it's an aggressively sweet funfetti cake and tastes like cotton candy. But if you have it with something bitter like black coffee, it's actually really nice. A roommate and her partner hate anything bitter. So now my roommate's crappy partner is having to sit there while I eat the cake they lovingly baked and cleaned up after for the person they're seething at. Best petty win. I get that the revenge is a bit esoteric here, so for context, A, I'm trying to get better at confrontation at the moment, so even something this minor feels like a win to me. B, it was a birthday cake that they had baked for my roommate, and were intentionally trying to keep away from me, as a petty jab because I'd politely asked them to clean up after themselves. C, this seems small, but remember this person is insanely entitled and overreacts to everything. They got angry at my roommate for offering me some, and not just throwing it in the bin, and then screamed at my roommate for like 10 minutes when I suggested adding espresso or almond extract to offset the sweetness next time. They didn't poison the cake, they're genuinely not that smart, plus it's been like 24 hours since I had any and I'm fine. 4. Years back in my early days of employment, early 2000, when I worked on the loading dock, we were expecting a big load of tech and products for the new office layout. Some fancy upgrades and big tech sending their latest computers and network equipment. Plenty of expensive equipment. And my boss told me to keep the trucks coming and going as smooth as possible. So we had a team on with a few extras. My responsibility was to get the unloaded pallets and stack them out of the way and ready for return to their owner. Company-owned pallets have to be returned. 6 a.m. I recaffeinated and started the forklift, and got to stack the CHEP pallet ready for collection. Around 8:30, one of the main representatives came in early and parked on the dock. This was a problem, as the trucks were scheduled for roll-in at 9 a.m. I asked him to use the main car park. He told me to fuck off and do my job. My job was to make sure that the truckies had unobstructed access to the loading dock. I interpreted this as, I'm too important, put it somewhere for me. So, to keep from damaging the car too much, I slid a CHEP pallet under it and got to lifting it, and I put the offending BMW up on a stack of pallets, the entire time singing, "Nothing lifts like a crown for picking it up and putting it down." We had a crown forklift. The rest of the crew were in stitches laughing. Many of the truckies rolled up and knew immediately I was on duty. Those guys always had the best stories. Some of them had a good chuckle and made off with a fresh cup of coffee. The day was going smoothly and we worked that forklift dry. As the last pallet came off the tank, the forklift emptied. As I dropped off the last pallet, we got that unpacked and used a tug, a small electric cart puller, to drag the forklift out of the way. So I contacted the boss and told him to get me a payment slip to go get the tank filled at a fuel station. He came down with the form and the representative. He was all smiles and thanks for the purchase of bulk computers and hardware. But that changed when he spotted his BMW. He was pissed and threatened my job. Demanded to my boss I get fired. I just looked at my boss and said, "We should look at the security cameras." When my boss reviewed the security footage, he pointed out that I did ask him to move and park elsewhere. He then looked at me and said, "Thanks for another day, see you tomorrow." The rep wanted the car down immediately. I said we can't, the propane tank for the forklift is empty, and gas delivery is tomorrow at 6 a.m. My boss handed me the payslip for refilling the forklift tank. He said to get the gas in the morning. The rep spat some more obscenities and said this will be tagged onto the bill if his car was damaged. He said it won't take much more than a postage stamp to send his boss the footage of him obstructing their loading dock, and then my boss looked at him and tapped the sign that said, "This is a loading dock, park at your own risk. We are not liable for towing or moving your vehicle, fines apply." The next day, after detaching the tank from the forklift, I lugged that bugger to my own car and drove off to get it filled. Upon returning with a charged tank of liquid work juice for the forklift, I started that bugger and got to moving the BMW down from its perch and ready for the rep to collect. So it's 6:30 a.m., and he has not arrived. But I decided to place this thing in the nearest accessible parking spot, on the street, ticketed spot, as our car park was not open yet. It was the only safe place available. I contacted my boss and told him and said, "Call the rep, it's ready for collection." And then I told him the spot, on the parking meter line. He responded with an OK. Then I got to work sending off the pallets for the day. It was a half-shift day for me. Now, as for Mr. Representative, he did manage to collect his car before it was ticketed for not feeding the meter, and I heard through my boss that the rep got chewed out and screwed out of his sales bonus for acting like a dick. Fuck, I miss that boss. 5. I am a 36-year-old woman and am a funeral director. This story is about a fellow industry professional and only mentions deceased people in passing and with no details. Some context about what brought up this event. About 15 years ago, Ja, 70-year-old male, a fellow funeral director, retired from the funeral home I worked at. I've only known him for a handful of years, but I've been told that his charming personality is a long-standing thing. He knows everything, he's condescending, and he's massively entitled. I'm not entirely certain why my bosses tolerate him, but I think it has to do with family business dynamics and small-town politics. Ja is not related to my bosses, but he worked with the previous generation until retirement, and thus has a long association with the family I work for. I've had to have words with him before about his conduct in the funeral home. He's not around terribly often, but when he is, he treats the place like he still works there, and he acts all pissy with me when I refuse to accommodate him unless it doesn't inconvenience me in the course of my work. Let me give you my two favorite examples. A Saturday morning, and I'm called to attend a death at a private residence. The deceased was a very large person, upstairs in bed, and we were in the middle of a heat wave. I tell you this so you have an inkling of how sweaty, tired, and sore I was when my colleague and I got the decedent back to the funeral home. We were in the middle of removing the stretcher from the van when the garage door opens. Behold Ja winning the worst timing awards. He wants to wash his midlife crisis car in our garage, because we have all the detailing equipment and supplies. My colleague and I pause what we're doing, and I explain, though I shouldn't have to, that it's not a great time. He stands there, mere feet away from me, and I'm standing next to the deceased who is on the stretcher, which is halfway out of the van and being held onto by my colleague. And the man dead-ass asks me, "Why?" Like he can't see we're in the middle of a transfer and it's not easy. He knows his job. He did it once upon a time too. His cheek pissed me off, so I replied, "Because I said so," and we went back to what we were doing. He stood there and silently watched us for a while before he just walked away and left the garage door open. Next up, someone in his circle passed away, and he was the executor of the estate, so he made the funeral arrangements. My genuine condolences to the man for losing someone he cares about, but he's still a jerk, and he acted like an ass during the funeral to several people for no good reason. He told someone to their face that the flower arrangement they sent was ugly. I heard it because I was chatting with the person behind them. After the funeral, he schedules a meeting with one of my bosses to go over the notifications we do. Government, IDs, pensions, banks, life insurances, etc. I was downstairs dressing a decedent when he arrived. He waltzed right into the room. I was in, bringing 3 members of the public with him, while I have a half-dressed person on the table in front of me. For context, the ID room is off the garage and has 2 doors, one from inside the home and one from the garage. Thankfully, the 3 others turned away immediately, and I had a sheet I could throw over the person. But Ja acted like it wasn't a big deal at all. It's a very big deal. We have pin-pad locks on certain doors for a reason, including the one he entered from. I was irritated with him, so I called him on bringing public through private rooms without checking first. He tried to put it on me that I should have been doing that task in the prep room, where no one would be walking through. But since he doesn't work with us anymore, he didn't know that we were slammed with calls, and that I didn't have space in the prep room. Instead of explaining that, I simply asked him, which one of us actually works here? He gave me a dirty look and left with his people in a huff, but he still took them through the room first. Which brings us to our most recent butting of heads in my petty revenge. Yesterday was the last straw for me. It snowed most of the day and I was running in all directions with my staff. We were keeping on top of snow removal and salting, while simultaneously running a very busy visitation. I went through almost 200 cards in 4 hours of visiting, which includes keeping fresh coffee, tea, pop, and water available to all guests, cleaning up the dishes they create, bathrooms, coats, and just generally assisting them. It's a very hands-on job with a lot of social interaction. During all of this, my assistant, who is new and doesn't know Ja yet, comes to me in a panic and says Ja parked in front of one of the garage bays and wouldn't move his car when asked. His verbatim response when asked was, "No, that's all right there." 'Twas the straw that broke the camel's back, folks. I went off to find him and demand his keys. He asked me why, and I told him, you know why. He gave me that fucking smirk of his and gave me his keys. We move cars for guests all the time, so he probably expected me to park it along the hedge, or at most, on the street behind the funeral home. I cannot even begin to describe the absolute pure petty satisfaction I felt as I drove his car across town and parked it in his fucking driveway. I debated parking it at the grocery store farther away, but I was worried it would be considered theft or mischief. And yes, I know where he lives, small town. I had my assistant follow me there in the van that he had blocked in with his car. When I handed Ja his car keys, I'm pretty sure I grinned like an idiot. He should have been suspicious. I told my bosses right away, just in case they disagreed and made me go back and get it. But I have never seen my one boss laugh that hard. He put his head down and made a sound I have never heard out of him before. The other laughed but said, "Now one of us is going to have to take him home." I shrugged, because I knew it definitely wouldn't be me. Ja did come find me an hour or so later with a red face that told me he'd been outside in the cold looking for it. I hope he walked the full block before he realized it wasn't on a street nearby. He demanded to know what I had done with his car, and I told him exactly where it was with a huge smile. I wish I could say he looked stunned, but I think by that point he knew I'd done something with it. He gave me a dirty look, and then turned and walked away from me without saying a word. I don't know who drove him home, but it wasn't me, and it wasn't my bosses either. I wonder if he'll listen next time he's told to not park in front of the garage doors. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge's Ice Cream, episode 331. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you want to support the channel and get early access, join my Patreon, which is linked in the description. You'll also find a link to the Hellfreezer merchandise store. If you like the video, why not leave a tip? You don't have to, but you can do so by clicking on that little heart with a $sign in the middle. Just go boop and select the tip of your choice. None of this is required, but I very much appreciate it. Alright, no other business today, no shoutouts I don't think, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is... For those of you who set New Year's resolutions, we're still in January, so it still counts. Have you set any? And if you don't, do you have any particular goals? Not necessarily a resolution, just things you'd like to achieve in this year. Speaking personally, I've got a list of things. I've got my spare room, which is going to get cleared out, because that's going to become an office for my fiancée. Obviously, we're going to be getting married, so that's definitely a big, giant tick on the list of things to take off. And I want to get the garden tidied up a little bit, just basically maintenance around the house, and build up my savings a bit, because that's always a good thing to do. Always good to have a bit of a safety net whenever you can. Unless, of course, you have family that borrows money from you and doesn't pay it back, but I don't know where that thought came from. Silly me, moving on. Why don't you let me know what your answers are in a comment below? I look forward to reading them. And before we go, let's have the answer of the day. We have one plus a bonus. This one comes from Lauren. And the answer is pizza. I've had thin crust, thick crust, great tasting, not so great tasting, but they all had mozzarella cheese. I moved to St. Louis, which has a large Italian population, so there was no shortage of family-owned pizzerias. The ex and I decided to try one. When we got it home and opened the box, we both just stared at it, aghast. It was orange. They had used cheddar cheese. I never in my life thought that would be a thing. It was a crime against humanity, i.e. it was inedible, but it's a thing. This was in response to the question about food things that you've always done one way and you had no idea people could do differently. And a bonus question, this comes from whatever name 4873. Hey, has he started using AI art? Yes, I have. I've been using it since 2022, so definitely not a recent thing. I've never made a secret of it. Some of you have probably heard me talk about it in other outros. I also create and sell images on Adobe Stock, some pretty good ones. If I'm happy with it, I'll put it up there and sell it. I've even had a couple of sales. And it's credited in the description of every single video. I hope that's a good and thorough answer to your question there. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.